Hey, everybody, it's Michael Angelo Caruso. Welcome to the Talk to Me podcast. I'm on with Bruce Headlam today. How are you, Bruce?
I'm well, and it's nice to talk to you.
Nice to talk to you as well, man. For those of you that are watching the video version of this podcast, you can listen on iTunes and all the various platforms. If you're listening, you can also catch the video version on the Michael Angelo Caruso YouTube channel. A few weeks ago, I had the pleasure of listening to the new Paul Simon audiobook, and it is fabulous. Bruce is one of the co-authors of that book with Malcolm Gladwell. I think you've remade how musicians will tell their stories in years to come. The autobiography was not serving a lot of musicians well. Have you received feedback like this?
I haven't received feedback like this particularly, but it was part of the genesis of the project. Malcolm and I met, as we typically have over the years. We've lived in New York every couple of weeks. We have a few drinks and, we remake some piece of journalism. What if we owned Sports Illustrated? What if we had to remake the New York Review of Books? And he was always keenly interested in audiobooks because he drives a lot. I don't drive. And I'm one of those people who doesn't like wearing headphones. So I don't listen to a lot of audiobooks, but he thought audiobooks could be much, much better. I had just read an autobiography of a musician. I was staying at someone's house and I just picked up this book that was there. Yeah. And it was terrible because it wasn't about music. It was about groupies, it was about drugs, it was about rehab.
And all those stories are the same.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I can't, I grew up in a musical family and I'm interested in the music. And even Keith Richards' autobiography, which is a great autobiography, I think he mentions like one lick he pulled from Jimmy Reed, and that's about it. There's not very much about music. Yeah. And I was saying, well, I remember talking to Malcolm saying, well, music is the obvious place to do this because the autobiographies are universally terrible, and most of, not universally, there are some good ones. Yeah. But you want to hear it, you want them to discuss it, and musicians are not often that good at discussing music, but if it starts to play, they go, oh, listen for this and listen to this. Yeah. Later, Malcolm and I started Broken Record with Rick Rubin, which is a podcast. And again, if you're sitting there with Robbie Robertson, he'll talk about listen to the upbeat in this part of King Harvest. That's what we couldn't get that for the longest time. That's what makes it work. So when the opportunity came up with Paul Simon, I was pretty excited because I thought, well, this is what we thought about doing years ago.
Well, for all your disclaimers about not being an audio guy, fair disclosure, you're a musician, aren't you?
I'm not a musician. No, I've got two brothers who are professional musicians. One is an opera conductor. The other teaches music theory at Eastman. All right. I play guitar, not very well. I play piano, not very well. But I do both those things better than I sing. So there you go.
I could tell from the book because you share duties with Malcolm in the audiobook.
Yeah, he narrates the whole book. We both wrote different parts of the book, but he's the narrator. Yeah. It didn't make sense to have two narrators, but you can probably hear both of us at times in the conversation.
Yeah, it sounded like maybe you handled the interviews with the various musicians who were guesting.
No, not all of them. Malcolm did Sting and Herbie Hancock. Okay. I did Roseanne Cash. One that was on the cutting room floor, which I deeply regret, is Joe Henry, who I think is just a fabulous musician. Yeah. So no, we split up those. I did the interviews with Bakiti Kumalu, who was Paul, the bass player that Paul met in South Africa, and whose work is all over Graceland and other albums, and Roy Howie, who's the engineer he worked with.
Yeah. And you, with the background in journalism, of course, a big part of music, especially pop music, is lyric and how that comes into songwriting. That must have been a special pleasure for you, coming from a musical family and understanding the English language. I think at one point in the audiobook, Malcolm identifies Paul Simon as the best English-speaking songwriter of our generation, maybe of all time.
There's going to be lots of people who are going to argue with that. Yeah. Oh, is it Dylan? Is it this person? Is it that person? when we first discussed this, and, I don't think it could have been just any musician. What fascinated us about Simon wasn't just that how good he is at various points in his career. It was that he probably has a longer career as a very successful musician. He had a hit with Art Garfunkel in the 50s. They had huge hits in the 60s. He had hits in the 70s. He had a massive hit with Graceland in the 70s and in the 80s. And if you talk to a lot of musicians like Elvis Costello or David Byrne, they would say the stuff he did in the 2000s, 2010 was his best stuff. So not many people have a career that's long in pop music. Pop music does not reward really long careers.
That's right.
And one thing we were interested in going in is, well, how do you stay creative over an entire span of a career? Because many people struggle with that. And Malcolm had written about that in the past, which became a framework for some of the chapters. Why is it that some artists like Picasso have this explosion of creativity and then kind of just like are drawing Randy Bulls for the rest of their lives for the tourists, and somebody like Cezanne, who never had that initial explosion, in fact, he was mostly rejected, even from the Salon de Refusés, which is for people who are refused. But he slowly built over his career and never stopped experimenting and got better and better as it went. Simon's in the second category. I can think of a lot of artists in the first category. Maybe Dylan would be an example of that, who just had this incredible explosion. And then, what he does now seems an echo of that. Yeah. It's not to be critical. Whereas Simon has continued to do very different things.
Yeah, and that was another interesting lens over the project, which was these creative spurts that most artists have versus, like you say, like over the arc of somebody's career. As a journalist, and maybe somebody who suffers from occasional writer's block, that would be fascinating to you.
Well, I'm an editor, so in part because I have writer's block. So I've always worked with other people. And not always, I've done some of my own writing. It is interesting from that perspective. And I thought, he's also a guy who suffered big failures and is wounded by those failures, who is still wounded by things that happened to him as a kid. His part of the issue with Art Garfunkel was Garfunkel had this transcendent voice. Yeah. And he mentioned more than once that his mother said to him, Paul, you've got a nice voice, but Artie has a fine voice. Artie was the star, not Paul. Yeah. And, I think he remembers his mother saying that to him. I think he remembers it probably about every 20 minutes because it really seemed to kind of get to him. But, what fascinated me, because you're trying to figure out, well, how do people do this? How does he deal with failure? Not that everyone has to deal with it in the same way. But, typically, probably when I've had trouble writing, I just grit my teeth and go at it more. I don't know if there's an old Charlie Brown comic strip where he assumes if everybody grits their teeth enough, they'll win a baseball game. Of course, they can't see anything because they're gritting so much. Whereas Paul Simon, he goes about it a different way. They had a hit in the 50s and then couldn't get another hit. So he kind of worked in the music business, in the old Tin Pan Alley, 1650 Broadway, which was one of the famous songwriters. And, he did demos. He learned different parts of the business. He learned how valuable it was to own his songs, which it certainly paid off for him. After, Sound of Silence, which was their first big hit, but it wasn't a hit when it came out. It wasn't. And he didn't kind of stick around and try and play Greenwich Village clubs where they weren't liked anyway. He went to England. He went to England to learn a whole different style of folk music. When he and Garfunkel broke up, he was clearly one of the most successful songwriters in the world at that point. They just released Bridge Over Troubled Water. And he said, no, I'm going to completely change how I write songs. And I'm going to learn music. And he set all these goals for himself to use all 12 notes in every song, which is very unusual for a pop song. And really, even Graceland, later, because he got into some political trouble for Graceland, and people were like, well, you're just exploiting these people so you can make all this money. his album Before Graceland and the movie he made were both failures as far as he was concerned.
Yeah.
The album is Hearts and Bones. I think it's got incredible songs on it, but he thought nobody was interested in him anymore, so he'll just do this because it's something interesting for him. He didn't go to South Africa saying, I want to work with township jive musicians because I think it's going to take me to the top of the charts. So if there's a lesson there for me and for anybody else who might struggle, it's persistence is one thing. Persistence is going at the same thing over and over again.
Right.
Tenacity is maybe finding another way in, another route. And that's what he seems very good at. He licks his wounds, but then he gets up and then he finds another way to attack the problem. He's very analytical that way.
There were a lot
Sorry,
of
that was an incredibly long answer. I'm not sure you even answered your question, but
no, it's
anyway.
great. The bit about working without a plan and then being okay with failure made me smile. You're right. It's a recurring theme in the book. It came up many times. As a musician myself, I drove the van that my brothers and I toured in, and I got accused of making a lot of wrong turns. And in my own defense, I always said it was because I'm driving more. That's why I'm making more wrong turns. But we got to every gig. We always got home. There was a kind of almost like a adventure in the wrong turn, because now you've got to get it right again or fix it.
Yeah.
It occurred to me that as you guys were putting the book together, and maybe this is from some of the things Malcolm said in the narration, that you didn't really have a plan for this either. You didn't know how it was going to go, how many times you would meet with Paul, what kind of content he would share with you. Is that true?
No. I would say, this is, well, it actually relates a little to Paul Simon. I'll explain how. One thing we realized about Paul Simon was that he was very devoted to the recording process, and he makes beautiful records, and even records you don't think are beautiful, there are enormous amount of very sophisticated things going on underneath. And he walked me through this little introduction to a song you wouldn't think twice about, but it was incredibly elaborate, because he believes the sound is really what allows people to engage emotionally, more than the lyrics, more than the melody. He believes in those things, but he thinks it's the sound of a song. And he found an engineer named Roy Halley, who just loved that about Paul. I doubt they ever talked about it in those terms, but they've spent years and years or decades saying, Paul, what about this? Oh yeah, I'll try that. What about this, Roy? Let's try that. The example I love is in the song Only Living Boy in New York, which is a gorgeous song, and it's got this incredible background singing. And I asked Paul about it, or maybe Roy first, and a lot of bands will use an echo chamber, which is literally a big chamber. You pump the sound in one end, and then there's a microphone at the other end picking up the sound after it's done a bit of echoing and reverberating off, usually tile. They had these famous echo chambers at the old Columbia studios up on 52nd or 53rd, which sadly are gone now. Sinatra, all these people had, their voices had gone through this echo chambers. Well, they weren't getting the effect they wanted. And Roy Halley said, okay, you and Art, go into this chamber. Nobody had actually stood in the chamber and sang before. Yeah. So Paul wrote the arrangements. I'm not going to sing it, but it's this beautiful, I think it makes the song, this beautiful background vocals. And they did it 9 different times, breathing at different points. So it sounds like one sort of unbroken human voice. It's just fabulous. Yeah. I think he just got Roy Halley, and Roy Halley just got him, which is a really wonderful thing in life. Sure is. I've known Malcolm almost my entire life. We grew up together in a small town. When we started this, we laughed because when we were 7, maybe, he just moved to town. His family had a stereo, but they didn't have any records. And his mother went and got 2 records, Bridge Over Troubled Water and Peter, Paul, and Mary. Now, Malcolm now claims he didn't like Peter, Paul, and Mary, but believe me, if you play Puff the Magic Dragon, even now, he will cry. I guarantee it. You know,
Let's talk
Dragons
about,
Live Forever, Not So Little Boys. I mean, it's a killer.
yeah. Let's
So
talk
we
about
remember
this.
that song. So, you know, what's funny is Malcolm and I were talking, whatever it was, I remember it was 2013 for whatever reason, about audiobooks and saying, yeah, that'd be great. And then whatever it was, years later, he called and said, you know, we could do an audiobook with Paul Simon. And I said, yeah, great. And I think we both, look, we had disagreements about what should be in it and different things. You know, I was pushing very much for certain things. He pushed for other things. It's his company. So when he pushes, he pushes a little harder than me. But we never had to talk to each other about how it was going to work. And then he had this idea, what if we just got other musicians, just have little snippets when they're talking? I was like, great. And the producers were wonderful, but they were like, well, would these be cameos? Would these be chapters? And they were trying to figure out what we were thinking. And I mean, I sort of feel for them, but we were trying to create something new. Yeah. And sometimes when you do that, it's hard to explain it to people what you're doing. It's really hard. And with Malcolm and I, we just never had to talk about it. It's a very strange thing, but if you know, when I think about, again, Paul Simon and longevity, I think it's because he had this guy, he's like, yeah, we don't have to discuss it. We just have to do it. And if you know, I had that with Malcolm. I mean, we don't work together very much, but it's, you know, projects I did at the Times when I was still there. I mean, the biggest pain was explaining it to people. Yeah. You know, I had this idea.
Tell everybody on mic here about your history with the Times so they know.
Oh, I worked at the New York Times for 19 years. I was an editor there. I worked with fabulous people. I love the New York Times. Weirdly, I started the media desk in 2008 at around the Times itself was struggling. And there's a whole documentary about the media desk back then. And sadly, I'm a part of it. You know, you don't really want to see yourself from behind on a big screen, but I did. But it was about my reporters, David Carr and Brian Stelter, and how to cover the meltdown of the media business when the Times was in the middle of it, and a lot of people thought the Times wouldn't succeed. Obviously it has, and it's prospering now.
What year was that?
That was, I think it came out in 2011. It's called Page One, A Year Inside the New York Times.
Yeah.
It was made by a very good filmmaker, Andrew Rossi, and he followed us around for 14 months, which I absolutely hated. I wanted nothing to do with it, but my writers were enthusiastic, so we did it. So you can see me in all my glory. Watching somebody edit, but it's not like a thrill a minute. Watching me edit, but the characters are in it, like David Carr and it's sadly gone now, and Brian Stelter. They're fabulous, and it kind of tells you what it's like inside a newspaper, for better or worse.
Why did you leave?
Why'd I leave?
Yeah.
You know, it was changing. The Times was changing its editing process, and it was going to mean even longer days. And I had worked weekends probably for 10 years. Got it early in the morning, late at night. I loved it, but I had little kids. I had one little kid, about to have another, and I thought I would never see them. And my father, who was a great, lovely man, but he was a workaholic, and I didn't see him when I was a kid. And I didn't want to do that. I'd done a bunch of big projects. I'd run the video desk, which was a huge desk with a $20 million budget, and we won the first Pulitzer for video. I went to Opinion. I came up with an idea for a comic strip about Syrian refugees that won another Pulitzer. And boy, talk about trying to explain an idea to people. It's like, it's a comic strip about refugees. People are like, I don't get it. Like, and I couldn't get anybody interested in doing it. Like, I talked to all these graphic novelists, and finally somebody suggested, oh, I just got this writer friend, Jake Halpern, who's done good stuff. And I said, okay, Jake, I feel stupid even saying this. You don't even know me. I'm just a guy at the New York Times. Would you like to do a comic strip about Syrian refugees? And there's just a pause, and he goes, oh, that's a great idea. I thought, okay, fine. That's all I needed. And then he found an illustrator.
You found Roy Halley.
Pardon me?
You found
I need it. You need it. It's the strange, I mean, as much as I love the Times, and they do great work, and there's lots I miss about it. I miss the attention to quality and the devotion to quality. that
Yeah.
so many
I'm
people,
watching from the outside, Bruce, but it seems to
Mhm.
me there's an exodus right now from the journalistic trade.
Well, that's because the money's gone. And for big national papers like the Times, and I would say a shout out to the former chairman, Arthur Sulzberger Jr., because he's the one who decided to charge. And that is what not only saved the Times, but saved a huge swath of quality journalism.
Charge for online.
Charge for online, yeah.
Yeah.
It was very controversial at the time because, you know, the ad rates, there's an infinite supply. So, you know, and the Times used to make, I think, you know, when I was first at the Times, I think there was a year they were the first publication to sell $1 billion in advertising. And those days are gone.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I think it's terrible for like local newspapers, great city newspapers, you know, in Philadelphia and all these cities. If you are a corrupt local official right now, it's a great time. It's a great time to be corrupt because people aren't watching you the way they used to. It's expensive work, journalism, and you can't guarantee an outcome. But it's only labor. There's not going to be a program that's going to cough up the answer to that you need. It's just shoe leather, as we used to call it in our romantic ways. But it's it's very sad. But the Times is doing great. They are doing maybe better than ever. They're bigger than ever.
Yeah.
It's strange. I was talking to a friend and I said, you know, it's strange for me because I was there for so long when the Times was struggling. And I said, now, when I kind of couldn't come up with the word, he goes, yeah, now we're the Death Star. It's like, yes, you are the Death Star. You hire everybody, you get everything, but they do great work. So
we've got a lot of threads going here, just like a Malcolm Gladwell book.
Oh yeah. Nothing
the template that he brings from The Tipping Point and Outliers, this, I call it weaving, I don't know what it's called, but he starts these little, he plants these seeds and then they start germinating at different times. And you did that in the Simon article where there would be a theme occurs and then he goes away from it for a while and you come back to it again. And eventually it all wraps around itself like a strand of DNA. It's lovely.
You know, he really, I can't say he was the first one ever to do that, but he really is the reason bookshelves look the way they do now with everybody, you know, the new science of this and the old science of X. You know, so much of that came from his first experiments because he was a guy who he covered science, he covered epidemiology at the Washington Post.
Yeah.
And then he started applying what academics were saying to other things. You know, I guess the other guy who does it, although he does it in a different way than Malcolm, is Michael Lewis.
Yes.
And it helps that they are two, and I can say this because I've edited probably 8, 10, 12,000 articles in my life. They're probably two of the clearest writers, and they're probably two writers who allow, this is going to sound strange, but they allow the reader to sort of involve themselves in what they're writing. Their writing has natural breaths to it. I taught at the Columbia J School this past term. I'd never taught up there before. And you know, we didn't really get to this part, but so much about that writing is letting people breathe. You're giving people a lot of information and how you do it and how you present it and the images you find to present information. You know, something like the Simon Project, you know, I probably wanted to junk it up with a lot of stuff because I was fascinated in so many things. And I think Malcolm probably, and this is a good thing, he kept it much cleaner. It really is, there's a family story with Paul and his father, which I frankly thought was a little more eatable than Malcolm did, but that's okay. There's the creativity story, the longevity story. You know, there are some other things.
Yeah.
But he was looking for those longer narrative arcs.
Let's stay with words for a second because they're so important to a book and the cadence. As somebody who edited newspaper journalism for so long, did it make you crazy? The short sentences, the phrases, did you want to put it
No,
to some sort of...
well, look, there are reasons for that. And, I started in magazines. And when I first started editing stories at the Times, I was editing magazine stories. And, well, once you put that in a newspaper format, it's torture. You can't do it.
Right.
No, it didn't. I think the one thing that drove me crazy, and I told my students this, was the whole idea, a news story is... In newspaper parlance, it's called the inverted pyramid. You put all the information at the top, and then it kind of gets, and there are literally, graphics that show how it gets less and less interesting as you go down, and to the point that, only people who really care about this will read this far. Put your dullest stuff at the bottom.
Right.
So I thought, wow, that's unlike any other form of writing. People don't have songs where they say, just put it's a good song. Can you put the dull stuff at the end?
No.
People don't write poems that way. People don't write short stories that way. There's no magazine story. Yeah, there's, and really, it's an artifact of the way newspapers used to be put together. You didn't know how long the column was going to be until it was put together in hot type, and you had these guys down in like the printers who could manipulate all the hot type. I mean, they were brilliant, but they had to take it off from somewhere. You weren't going to tell that guy, can you just thin it out at the top? You don't have those restrictions anymore. So I'm like, no, it's got to be, have a great week. We call them kickers, I don't know what, in newspapers. No, have a great quote at the end. Make people, your job, like for me, my job is like, I dare you not to finish this article. That's our job with Simon. I dare you not to do that. Or a comic strip about Syrian refugees. Once you read one, I dare you not to get incredibly involved.
Like potato chips.
That's honestly, that's our job. And then want to pick up something else. When, I was working in video, no, you see that first frame, about that ambulance driver, fighting Ebola in, I think it was Liberia, which was one of the pieces that helped win the Pulitzer. Like, no, you're not, you see that body in the street, you see his face, you're going to watch right till the end. I mean, it's only 6 minutes, for God's sakes, but it's beautifully structured.
Yeah.
And that's where craft comes in. And I think similarly with Paul Simon, like, he doesn't want people to go, hello, darkness, my old friend. What else is on? And maybe that's why he believes sound, which runs all the way through, is really the emotional thing. I don't know. It's our job, and I think we both have completely different sensibilities, Malcolm and I, and we latched onto different things. But I think we both knew that's our job. If you start it, you're going to listen right till the end.
Did Paul get with your program? Because there's a couple partnerships going on here, you and Malcolm as co-authors, and then you need the source to be cooperative with that to some extent, because I've heard about people that get really proprietary about what they're sharing and how it's being done. No, I don't want it being done that way.
Here was our advantage. Nobody had ever done anything like this. And people kept saying, well, is he going to narrate it? No, not really. It's going to be interviews. It's going to be journalism. How is it going to be journalism? Well, we're going to write it like journalism. Who's going to read it? Well, kind of Malcolm, but you're going to be there. Yeah, sometimes. Like, we didn't. And Simon, like, I don't know what their initial conversation was, because if one of us, either Malcolm or I, have to have lunch with famous people, it's going to be Malcolm. I think he can probably sell a little better than me. The guy would be like, who are you again? So I don't know how he sold it to Paul Simon, but Paul Simon first day just sat down and said, whatever you guys want to do. I mean, it's an experiment. One thing about Paul Simon is he's up for anything. He's not up for anything. He's up for interesting things.
Okay.
And he thought this would be interesting. The first day, it's always hard to get these things going. And he was very lovely to deal with. But the first day, at some point, we just decided to listen to old records that he loved, because he loves old records. He loves very particular old records. He loves this doo-wop song that you and I might not be able to tell the difference between that doo-wop song and this doo-wop song. But he will tell you, listen to when the guitar comes in. Those are jazz chords. I think it may have been Mickey Baker who played it. Listen to the, and he will tell you how Mystery Train is the greatest song ever recorded.
Yeah.
And you can hear it through his music. Late in the Evening, Graceland, Once Upon a Time, There Was an Ocean, or So Beautiful or So What. I'm talking about some of his later work now. You can hear the influence of that song. He was fascinated that everybody thinks it has drums, but it didn't. It was the slapback in Sam Phillips' studio. He loves talking about studio space, by the way. So I think he just thought, let's just try it and see how it goes.
Yeah.
No, we weren't. It was going to be about music, and it was going to be about creativity. It wasn't going to be, and if people want a rehash of like a disagreement he had with Art Garfunkel, they're not going to find it. They're going to find things about the music they made when they were coming apart.
Yeah.
And I find songs in that album like Frank Lloyd Wright and Only Living Boy. I find them beautiful and evocative, but they're about basically a couple breaking up, a musical couple.
Yeah, he wrote both songs about Artie leaving the band.
Yeah. Now, what I didn't know is, and I guess Artie didn't realize Frank Lloyd Wright was about him for the longest time. He studied architecture at Columbia, so that was Paul's way of saying it. He thought, man, you didn't get that? Although Roy Halley, and I'd never heard it until he said it, he goes, at the end, when they were doing, in the outro, which is this beautiful, it's got the flute in it. You can hear Roy Halley saying, "So long, Artie," and now you can hear it in the song. So
Easter egg.
Easter egg, you find.
That's funny.
Yeah. You're not gonna. It's not about hurt feelings or who he was married to. I mean, he talked a bit about that, but I'm not. I can read any musician's autobiography for, petty disputes and wives they felt didn't sufficiently honor their genius or whatever their problem was, and we didn't want to talk to them about that.
Yeah, well, it makes for a tighter content. I mean, you really get a sense that we're doing a deep dive into the creative process instead of family squabbles and money issues and things like that.
Which is, obviously I would have been doing this without Malcolm, and it was a great pleasure to do it. But I think the benefit of one of the many benefits of having Malcolm's name on it is that people don't expect, of the warts and all biography, because that's not what Malcolm deals in. He typically deals in ideas. Now, we both contributed ideas to it. I tended to contribute some more of the musical ideas, but we both talked a lot about the family stuff. Yeah. And, Malcolm, we were both interested in the creative long-term stuff. Different ways of expressing it, I think.
I have a couple of questions about the production, and because it's such an unusual, like I say, it's such an unusual turn from the classic autobiography where you're reading the musician talking about a song, but you can't really remember the song. And then he goes into deep detail about it. Now you got to go find it someplace, put the book down, go find it, come back to the book again and re-reference what you just read. But this new format, especially with a guy like Simon, who's got chops, he's talking about a song and then he plays a bit of it in real time. I'm sure there was some editing going on, but it's done in flow. And I know to do that because you have to get rights to all this stuff somehow. Was it a legal nightmare to get clearance from all of these?
I was not the producer, and the producer could tell you, and they did an absolutely beautiful job, everybody at Pushkin. They can tell you exactly what a nightmare it was. When we started it, I can't say Malcolm is he's not a huge detail man when you start something.
Okay.
I was worried about that, but Paul Simon owned all his own music when it started. When it started, he owned the publishing rights because he's a very smart guy and he worked in the music business and he knew, wait a second, this is valuable and everybody else is getting ripped off and I don't want that.
You're saying when it started, Bruce, when their career
started? When he started, I'm sorry. When we started this project with Paul, he owned it, but he sold his publishing rights to Sony halfway through.
Oh,
now Paul with us is like, don't worry, I'll give you anything you want. In the end, I don't think Sony was maybe they weren't
Oh,
quite
that's
as sentimental about us. So we're like, you'll just give it to us, won't you, Sony? Like, well, we just spent $400 million, so I think we're going to charge you.
Was he, so a little sidebar here, is Simon one of the guys that sold his
Yes.
entire catalog?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
There is so much private equity money now
Yeah.
pouring into that, and a lot of these guys, I don't know,
Dylan.
they're all with us for a very long time.
Yeah.
But they're getting older now. There are probably tax reasons
Okay.
to do this now, which I wouldn't understand. Maybe somebody should do a whole just book about Paul Simon and accounting. But
That'll be a Michael Lewis project.
Yeah, Michael. Yeah, he'll find the problem. The bubble in songwriters. If it crashes, it'll wipe out the economy. Yeah, I don't think the songwriters bubble, has existential.
Sony anti-up? Did they help?
Pardon me?
Did
Did they help? I by that point, fortunately, I had done my job, and it was before we did the editing. There was clearly some things we had to restrict some of what we got. I think Joe Henry did a great riff about the song Duncan, which I thought was beautiful, but at some point we just had to cut, and we had to cut a couple other musicians. We couldn't probably include as much stuff as we would have wanted. He has a song called, which we talked about a bit, Renee and Georgia Magritte with their dog after the war. I would have done a whole episode just about that song, about how it was made, what I think it means, which Paul Simon is, he's a big New Yorker. He'll disagree. He'll say, well, Paul, you wrote this song. This must be about your dad. And I go, no, it's not. But it says it's about your dad. No, it isn't. So he's a very argumentative guy, I have to say. So that all three of us are. So there's a lot of arguing going on. So yeah, we didn't get to do every song probably we wanted to do. I would have done a lot more.
The project, you had 100 hours of content and winnowed it down to 4+ for the final product.
I don't think it was 100. Probably got to 50 though.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So still a lot. Yeah, that's a lot.
Of the stuff that's missing, you've mentioned a few things now of Mr. Hunt and some of the other things. Did you have any serious regrets about what didn't happen, or what you didn't get to ask him, or what's missing?
I just mentioned Renee and Georgia Magritte, which to me is this incredible song, which is really, Paul comes from a kind of typical fractious East European family. His grandfather came over and was a tailor in Newark, and everybody blamed his grandmother for nagging his grandfather to death, and the father, it was all this kind of crazy stuff. And to me, that song is really a song about, the old world after the war. Renee and George Magritte come over here, and they find sort of this beautiful life listening to the songs that Paul loved growing up, which by the way, his father hated. Paul listened to doo-wop, and his father just thought that was junk, right?
Yeah.
So I was sorry we didn't have more of that. I wanted more chapters on the later albums, which I realize is a problem because they're not very well known.
Right.
I'll tell you what I really wanted. He made a big change after Graceland, in which he started writing songs based much more on rhythm than melody. Now, there's lots of people who are good rhythmic songwriters, and certainly when hip hop comes along, that's how a lot of stuff is written now. But he was always interested in kind of rhythm as the driving force for such a good melody writer. And that really started with Rhythm as Saints. And I'll tell you what I wanted to do, and the producers disagreed with me. There is a recording in the archives of Paul and Artie in '69 in a hotel in Los Angeles, probably about a mile from where the Manson murders had just happened. And out of frustration, they start banging on pieces of luggage, tapping out this rhythm. And Roy Halley starts recording it. Rhythm is, I'm making stuff up. But, and that sound, that hitting on luggage, becomes the rhythm track for Cecelia. Yeah, which to me is like this great song. It's so different. It's like sui generis from the rest of that album. And it it was a kind of seed for him for a different kind of songwriting. And that really from Rhythm of the Saints through You're the One, I would say Surprise, up until probably So Beautiful or So What, was really the way he conceived of songs. It's very, very different. Not many people just completely change the way they write in that way. So I was desperate to do that. I thought opening with that, I just like the smile on my face if I hear people hitting luggage, and then suddenly it morphs into Cecelia. But, maybe it was a rights thing. I don't know what it was. Maybe we just couldn't get the archives. I know it was in the archives because I looked through an exhaustive archives list, but we didn't get that. So that's my big, maybe in Paul Simon too, the rhythm years.
Yeah. Well, you got enough content.
We'll get that going. Yeah, he's got a lot of stuff.
Favorite,
so that was it. That's my disappointment.
Just a couple more questions.
Sure.
Bruce, thank you so much. Highlight from the project, something that is your personal favorite moment? And maybe it didn't make the final recording. Maybe it was a personal interaction.
It didn't make the final recording. Probably at one point, there was a day I was there and Malcolm wasn't there. And we were talking about music. And at some point, Paul was trying to show me something. He had his guitar. He said, well, here, you pick up the guitar. You play the rhythm part. I'm a pretty lousy guitar player. But for some reason, I was just so in journalist mode that I was just like, okay. So I was playing and he was showing me. And then I suddenly thought, oh my God, I'm sitting here playing guitar with Paul. This should be this is one of the greatest moments of my life.
Wow.
But I wasn't, because I was just focusing on what he was doing. And the minute I did that and thought this is the greatest, my hands started sweating. I couldn't make a chord. I was just, so fortunately, no one will be tortured with listening to my guitar playing. But, when that happens, that's...
You turned old George Plimpton, remember him?
Oh, of course.
The investigator.
Paper Lion. Yeah, all that stuff. He played goal for the Boston Bruins. Yeah, it was a bit of that. And I thought, wow, I'm sitting here playing guitar. And the minute I thought that, I'm like, man, do I stink? And he was very nice about it. And, he showed me around the studio and showed me all these tricks he had to recording. And it was and I did a big section about that. And again, it didn't make the final cut because we had so much stuff.
Yeah.
And, people were, I guess, less interested in how he added microtones to the first 20 seconds of Questions for the Angels. To me, it was fascinating. But
that had to be an editorial decision you guys made early on, how technical to get with the music.
Yeah. I probably would have gotten a little more technical. I always think in journalism, it never hurts just to aim just above people's heads a little bit, make them jump a little bit. But there's plenty of good stuff. I mean, there's a conversation about literally one note in the harmony part of Sound of Silence. When I said, it's funny, you hold the tonal note there. You don't go up a third. And the Everly Brothers probably would have done that. It's one note. God, I'm going on and on about drone sounds and drone sounds and folk music, and that's why I made this choice. It just sounded a little funny to me. It was one damn note, but it just took him off in this whole different direction. So there's no lack of music in this. I'm just,
I thought it was a perfect balance. And good. I agree with you. In the speaking business, we say it's better to talk above the audience's head than below it. So same basic thing here.
Which I think has been a little bit lost in the modern age. I liked things that were hard for me, not calculus, algebra hard for me. But I didn't mind looking up words in a dictionary or just kind of reading through them and kind of figuring out what they meant. I always read stuff that was a little
and it's not just
beyond my grade level.
If you watch TV commercials, they're written for 7th graders.
Yeah.
They're selling insurance for adults, but they're like cartoon characters and stuff. There has been a really dumbing down for sure.
I think so. And the Times probably has a very different tone now than it would have. And it's very important, I think, people feel to be tonally kind of available to the widest possible audience. Yeah. And I don't think the audience always loves that. No, I think they don't mind being they don't mind being challenged a little bit. I remember years ago seeing old episodes of Leave It to Beaver, which was the classic silly 50s and 60s comedy that's we would look down upon now. But there were references to John O'Hara and Babbitry and sort of literary things that you'd never put in a show now. Someone's going to make a John O'Hara joke? Yeah, it's just not going to happen. Yeah. So there was something appealing about it's now called middlebrow, but about the idea that your audience wants to be smarter, that they want to know more things. So I hope the Paul Simon, I hope Miracle and Wonder does a little bit in that direction, because we want it to be challenging and interesting and make people reflect on their own lives, their own creative lives. Yeah, loved it. Let's close with a future question. I was halfway through the book and I'm thinking to myself, if this is going to be like a new genre, who's the next subject? And I started thinking it has to be somebody that can actually play. It can't be a faker. No. Like Billy Joel's been doing his piano side talks. Even on the Billy Joel channel, you can hear him talking about how he wrote songs perfect for this format. It is. He may be a guy who has already done it enough. Like his life is a kind of open book in a way I think that Simon's wasn't. I have my, I don't think I'm doing something else now. I don't think I'm going to be working on the next one. There were certainly people I would want to work on, but it's Malcolm's company, not mine. So we'll see. You want to give a plug for your project? Is it too early? For what? I'm working for, it's a new journalism nonprofit called Aventine or Aventine. You can tell we're new because we don't even know how to pronounce it. AVENTINE.org. Okay. And I'm working with Danielle Mattoon, who was the culture editor at the Times for a long time. And it is it's journalism that's going to look very broadly at the future. It's going to be explanatory journalism about things like climate change, things like machine learning and AI systems, how ubiquitous they are and the trouble with them, and all kinds of human performance, all kinds of different things. And I'm working on my own writing on the side too, but I'm actually writing something about Richard Nixon. So I'm kind of all over the place, as always. Good for you, man. Yeah, master of none. We can find you on Pushkin as in the podcast, right? Pardon me. Yeah, we're still doing Broken Record. Okay. Which is Malcolm and I and Rick Rubin, the big famous producer, and we do interviews. And I just interviewed John Baptiste from the Colbert Show, and I'm about to do one of my heroes, who's Alison Krauss. Nice. And we get to do, for some reason, all the musicians I do are, well, I guess those guys don't apply, but I either do people in their 80s or their 20s, and there's a lot of really young, fabulous songwriters. It's like the new version of the 80-20 rule. Yeah, you're interesting when you're 80 or when you're 20, but you're not interesting anytime in between. Malcolm and I used to talk about this because magazines always want to profile the next hot young thing. And we'd always be like, hot young things haven't done anything. Old people are interesting. Interview old people, for God's sakes. You bet. I interviewed Judy Collins, who's a folk singer who, she wasn't my favorite, but would you interview her? Sure. Yeah. She was fantastic. Oh, good. A million stories, just like a total ball of fire, just a blast. Well, I don't know how old you are, Bruce, but you're very interesting, and I appreciate you being with me today. I'm somewhere between 20 and 80. Since I've had kids, I'm much closer to 80. Bruce Headlam is the co-author of Paul Simon, Miracle and Wonder with Malcolm Gladwell. It's a fantastic audio program. You had a special name for it too. It's not actually an autobiography. What did you call it? I think we called it an audio biography, but then the autocorrect on email kept changing it. We don't know what it is. It's an audio book for which there is no book. It's fantastic. You should check it out, everybody. Bruce, thank you so much for being with me. Thank you so much. It was just wonderful to talk to you. Take care. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.